So in the last video, we talked about entering in our data to get it ready for calculations. So just to sort of review where that data would be, if you go to Stat and then 1 for Edit, all of your lists are in there. And we talked in the last video about how to add values to correct values, how to erase values in these lists. So we're ready to go. All of our values here are in list 1. So I'm ready to go through and do some calculations. So I'm going to press Stat again, okay? But rather than clicking on Edit here, I'm going to scroll over one more to get to Calc for calculations. And we're going to want to use 1 for now, 1 variable statistics. So in our list 1, we had one sort of set, 1 variable. It's quantitative, representing, you know, the scores on the exam. So we're going to want to do 1 variable statistic. So I'll press 1, or because it's highlighted, you could also press Enter. You need to specify what list you want to do your calculations on. By default, this will say L1, and as long as you've put your data in the first list, L1, you should be good to go. Suppose you wanted to change this to a different list. The lists are listed as sort of blue letters on the number keypad here. So if I really wanted to do list 2, it's sort of the blue value here on the number 2. So you can do second and then 2, and that will put in list 2. So if you wanted to change that, you can, but I'm just gonna go backwards and move it back to list 1 since that's where my data is located. Freak list, we're not going to use really at all in this course. Mostly that's if you have data that's formatted in a way where you actually have 2 columns, one column which gives sort of all the different possible values, and another column which gives you the frequency at which those numbers occur. So we might end up using that later in the course, but for now we're just going to leave that blank. By default, it'll just assume that each of the numbers has a frequency of 1, which is true here. And I'll press Enter to calculate, and it's going to spit out a whole bunch of different variables. I'm going to just talk about a few that I think are important. So X bar, the very first thing it spits out, the 75.1, that's your sample mean. Okay. Another one that is important is this SX, 11.1.01, etc. That's your sample standard deviation. So that's a measure of the spread of the data. I want to really point out that it's important that you use the SX variable as long as we're doing calculations on sample data. The sigma S is only for if it's population data, which we don't usually work with. So for the most part, you're going to want SX for your sample standard deviation. Okay. Some other things that are useful here, it does tell you that n is equal to 10, meaning that there's 10 observations here. I entered in 10 numbers, and all these statistics were calculated based on those 10 numbers. And then we've also got what they call the 5-number summary. So the minimum value of X, so that just means the minimum number in that whole list of numbers is 62. It works out my first quadrant, or sorry, my first quartile, which represents the value where 25% of the observations fall below and 75% fall above. We've got our median here, so that's where 50% of the observations fall below and 50% fall above. Our third quartile, and then the maximum value. So all of that information is there under 1 variable statistics.